again. Good number of new faces in here, which is always good to see. Hopefully, you guys have been finding these sessions valuable. I think, as I said in my messages that I put out there, this week's and next week's are going to have the most good stuff in them. So hopefully, everybody here can find at least a couple takeaways that they can get out of this. So let's just jump on into match mindset. And before we kind of do that, yeah, just this week, next week, those are going to be the last two. Still going at 5:30, but if you missed any of the last workshops, they're recorded. If you want to go see them, I've already posted the second and the third. I want to edit down the first one a little bit before I post that one out, since that one did run a tad long and I didn't get to cover quite everything that I wanted to. So be on the lookout for those. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to see you next week as well. Before we jump in, since there are some new faces here, I'm sorry if this is like your fourth time hearing this, but I will talk a little bit about myself. So I was 422's scouting lead back in 2018 and 2019. I was a student, obviously, and graduated in 2019 before I went to Virginia Tech. When I was there, pretty much immediately became a mentor and have been mentoring since then. Really only personally focused on the scouting and strategy side of things. I'm not, a super technically minded person myself. That would be my two older brothers who were both engineers, and they both went through 1086 Blue Cheese's program, which is another local team. In my time on 422, I've been on, some good teams, some very good teams, and some teams that struggled a pretty good amount. So I've gotten kind of the full range of experience in terms of success. So learned a lot along the way, and in the 10 years, we've won some events, gotten upset pretty badly, but I think a lot of the lessons that we've learned, I'm going to be sharing with y'all today. Currently, right now, I am a data analyst for a large medical supply distributor, and kind of that's also what I majored in college. Data analytics has been kind of a passion of mine for a while now. So let's get into it. All right. So match strategy. So really begins before the event even starts. All right. And if you came to my last couple sessions, you've probably heard me talk about this, but drive practice is your best friend, and you should already have, kind of a set strategy flow ready to go in your driver's mind before, the first match of the year even starts, right? Ideally, this year we were able to get a robot done early, basically have it work first try. Obviously, that's not going to be possible in every single year, but if it is, be sure you are getting your drive practice just like you would get practice for any other sport, right? And what that in-match strategy flow kind of means is, say, you're the only robot on the field, you should, be able to instantly know the order of every action you are going to take in your 2 minutes and 15-second teleop period, right? And so what we did this year, even before our first event, and I'll kind of just play this in the background, right, was we ran 215 after 215 after 215 practice, just to kind of nail in that timing, nail in all the like micro motions that your driver is going to make. And I think for us, that was kind of like a definite difference maker versus years past, where 30 seconds hits, your driver already knows, like, hey, end game's coming. They know, all right, I've scored this many. This is how many more I need to score for the RP. So having that is a very, very big benefit. We do also work like occasional situation drills. Typically that was more during the season. We didn't do as much before the season, but just practicing like, final 30 seconds. Let's score a couple game pieces and get a climb in. Or there's game pieces everywhere. Let's try not to get beached up on an algae. Right. So this is where before the event, you should be watching other events. If other events have happened, if you're competing week 2, there's a week 1 event, watch it, learn the game. Okay, that's where your strategy is going to start. It's not the focus is for today. And also, if you can, try to get drive practice on a full field. There's local teams. So if one of them has a full field and you can get on it, like we were able to get into the Regency field, it was kind of 3 teams that I called out there, kind of all use that and let us borrow that space. Something that can really elevate your performance to another level. So let's get into the real meat of this presentation, right? So qualification match strategy. Okay. So starting at the very beginning, right? We're going to walk through step by step before the match, during the match, after the match. Okay. Before you even start to plan for a match, the first step is you got to figure out what would the ideal outcome of this match be. Okay. And so this was something, we're doing all year long where we're looking at our scouting data and Statbotics along with like the schedule to kind of understand, okay, we think we have, this percentage chance of ranking 1. So, we really should be pushing for every single RP possible, taking higher risks and matches where, maybe it's a close match, but, we still want to push for that RP because we think we can get that top seed. There's also matches where, you might realize like, hey, we probably can't push for the extra RP in this match because it's so close. And, if the game's like 2025, where you have to kind of choose between scoring maximum points and scoring, points in a way that, or pieces in a way that gives you the rank point. We had to make those calls where, okay, this match we're going with our max point strategy. This match we are going with our RP strategy, right? And kind of going back to drive practice, those are kind of the 2 things that we really nailed in again and again and again was, here's the order of game pieces that we score if we're doing this. Here's the order of game pieces that we score if we're doing this, right? There are some other situations though, where if you're far from captaining, you don't need ranking points. So you don't need to worry about it as much, right? You should be more focused on showing off, what you can do before alliance selection. Now, I will say, if you're in a district ranking points or district points do exist depending on where you rank. So that's another thing you'll have to kind of balance out. But specifically at Worlds, I kind of tell teams like, hey, you should be stat padding as much as possible because people pick off their numbers. And, advocate for yourself to be able to get those easier game pieces in your pre-match strategy sessions. And you're going to increase your likelihood of getting picked by a decent bit. In 2018, that was something we did a lot as a team, was basically just, all right, we know we're not ranking. Let's just score as many game pieces as possible. One other kind of situation that I'll call out was there are times when you might want to even deny the opponent an RP or a tiebreaker point, right? You have to evaluate the situation from every angle. So I do kind of have a example of this, and you have to do it in a way that's GP, of course. You can't just go in and break them, right? But if you can find different ways to strategize around that, it's an option to explore. So I guess I can go to this next page. So this didn't actually end up happening, but somewhat hypothetical situation that we were pretty scared was going to happen, that we'd have to make a tough decision on. So we are in Newton, the Newton division, which was very tough at the top, right? You have what many people are calling the two best teams in the world in Madtown and Jack in the Bot, right? We understood that the only real way we are going to walk out of this event with a win is if those two teams get together. And that's like at any cost. Like we think we have a chance against either one of those teams, depending on who our partners are in elims, but we don't think there's any way really to kind of overcome the hurdle of those two teams being together. All right. So we were looking at what is any possible way that we can prevent these teams from ranking one. End of day one, we are first rank, but we have this match, it's match 86, on the way on day two. Right. And you can see here, so this is the predicted scores. We're predicted to lose by 114. Right. These are three very, very, very good teams. Madtown, Chaos Theory, and Chill Out. Okay. So good that we could score 180 points by ourselves and still lose the match. So we knew because of that, we're not going to rank one, right? Madtown was projected like they're going to go undefeated. But we saw another team, Livonia, had a shot at going undefeated. So in this match, right, before this match, before day two started, Livonia was actually ranked ahead of them. They had, I think, one rank point, or no, the ranking scores were tied, and they were ahead in co-op, which is the first tiebreaker. So we knew the only shot Livonia had at ranking one was if they got maximum RP and finished all of their co-opetitions. So in this match, we knew that Madtown was probably going to be going for those co-opetition points if possible. So we said, okay, we can just say, hey, we're not going to cooperate with y'all, but they're probably just going to force it. So what we did, or what we hypothetically were going to do, was prevent them from forcing cooperation, right? We were going to play defense on our own processor to stop them from getting that co-op point on the off chance that Livonia can get, go undefeated and get all their rank points and stay ahead. Now, that didn't end up happening. What ended up happening was Livonia ended up dropping a couple of RP earlier in the day, and then we were like, oh, you know what? We kind of could use that co-op. And we went and talked to the other alliance and said, maybe if y'all do it, we'll do it. We did it. They didn't. That's the game, right? You can't be angry at that. But those are the kinds of things that like we as a team are working through, right? We're going through every single situation to try to find, the best strategy to give us the highest chance of getting the outcome that we want at the event. Right. So that's all before we even start planning. We're going in through all those situations. Right. Before we kind of actually, huddle up with our other teams, there's some steps that we take to prepare for that meeting. Right. Just because if you come in to a pre-match huddle well prepared, with data, with, we have an iPad that we draw on, it makes teams a lot more likely to actually listen to what you have to say, right? If you come in and you're, not really sure of what's going on, right? Even if you have some good ideas in mind, you might get bulldozed a little bit. So do recommend kind of, using whatever tools you have available to make sure you're as prepared as possible, right? So what we have is we have our scouting database, and as a part of that, just this like pre-match planning sheet, which we can pull up whatever match number, and it just gets us a few numbers on every single team, as well as some space that we can, actually draw out our strategy. Again, before you get into that pre-match stuff, you want to have an idea of what your team's ideal role will be, and that's the thing you need to be the most sure of, right? As a part of that, you should always try to lean into what you're best at, minimize your opportunity costs, right? And basically what that means is, two teams might be equal in one trait, but one team might be significantly better in another than the other team, right? And so even though they're equal in this one trait, the team who's better at the other one should focus on that, and the team who's worse at that one should focus on the trait they're equal in. So we kind of, work through situations and try to figure out what we want to lean into the most, right? We're looking at our own numbers and coming up with our own plan first, right? Then kind of before we look at our teammates, we look at how we think the opponents are going to be playing, right? We say, okay, are they going to be sending defense? Are, there leftover pieces in autonomous that we need to be, focusing on rushing in and grabbing? Are they going to be, using some counterable strategy because of, what their numbers suggest? Like they're going to be passing to each other and that's going to let us steal pieces. So obviously you're not going to be able to get anything super exact out of this, but it does, let you brainstorm plans for your alliance easier when you have ideas of what you're going to be up against, right? And before you actually go into the huddle, we do like to have, some vague plans for what we think our alliance partners should be doing, whether they're better than us scoring wise, whether they're worse than us scoring wise. We just try to come up with something realistic to maximize our chances of winning, right? It's not just about us, it's about the alliance. So once you are actually in the huddle, okay, the main key in qual specifically is don't overcomplicate things, right? Teams typically they aren't going to work as consistently, and that makes, their performance in match harder to predict. Kind of with that, the main thing you should really be focusing on in terms of scoring is spacing, right? What that means is staying out of each other's way, you know, understanding that there's choke points in different areas that everyone has to pass through. So you're trying to get your timing right on not having your teammates collide into each other, not being in the same place at the same time. We find typically in quals, zones are going to work better than, strict hard paths. And kind of what that means is like, as you can see down here on our little planning sheet, this one's actually kind of filled in. We found, especially this year, that it works better when, you give teams just space to operate and basically, they can do whatever they need to there. You see this one's nicely color coded, but so typically what we do a lot through the year was, we just take one half of the wreath and then, give our teammates the other half and they kind of split in a way where they're not intersecting as much. And scoring wise, that's kind of generally most years the main thing to focus on. And seasons like 2024, you do have passing versus full field cycling, in which case you just need to look at your numbers and see, which strategy each team is performing the best in. So if you have a, two passer specialists, can one of them actually, clean up, or are you better off going full field? Those kinds of things, you just lean into the numbers. You're not always going to get your way, right? And you just have to understand that, right? There are times when you might be able to, gently pitch a team, like, hey, this is why we think, defense would be better for you because you're this close to ranking. And if we play defense, that gives us the best chance of winning. And, then you're going to get the most rank points versus if we lose, you don't get as much. But if they're not going for it, of course, you always have to just let them be, right? The one thing you don't want to do is annoy your teammate. Then You're not going to have good communication in the match. They're upset for alliance selection, and it's just something you want to avoid. And the other thing is always have contingencies in mind. Typically we don't go as in detail in a quals pre-match analysis, but you do just want to have kind of general ideas of what should happen if a team breaks, if someone is coming and playing defense on you, if you know your auto misses, anything like that. Just have you know quick plans for, right? You don't have as much time to get into the details like we would in elims. We'll kind of talk more about when we do get into the detail then. As I talked about, a lot of times the tougher decision, other than your scoring roles, is when are you sending defense, right? The overall rule is if you think your team or your alliance partner can deny the opponent more points than they can contribute, and you want to win the match rather than, getting RP, you might need all three teams scoring to hit some RP threshold, so maybe it's not even worth it then defense is your best option. Right. And there's a small extra catch to that where if you send defense, you have less robots trying to score at once. That's less congestion. You're going to see those teams performing better because the spacing is so much better, especially if the other alliance sends a defender, then you having a robot out of the way is going to matter much, much more. Right. There's two kinds of, defensive styles that you see typically, and it kind of mirrors like what you'd see on a football field, right? You have what I'll call man defense, which is when, you have a robot you're trying to shut down, right? A specific team that you want to focus on, that you want to slow down. You're not worried about the rest of the alliance. You're worried about them, right? And typically you'd want to do this if there's a really good robot on the other alliance, or if there's a pretty good robot, but, they've shown that they're very vulnerable to defense, right? Whether you see that through scouting or you just understand like, hey, they don't the way they're picking up game pieces, they're going to be dropping them if we give them a small bump. That's when you're going to want to play man. Okay. Zone, which I'll say more often what we lean towards, is typically the game is going to have some kind of choke point where multiple robots are going to try to get to either pick up a game piece or to score a game piece. All right. And typically you'd want to do this if the alliance says more balance to them. Right. And so, like, for examples of what that is like this year, there's only two coral stations. You could put a defender at one of them, shut one of them down. Right. 2024, we saw if Einstein finals, you could play defense between the stage and the loading zone. And because, that was such a narrow space, you would really, force the opposing alliance's spacing into a very small area, meaning you had two robots basically trying to cross paths constantly. Right. The goal here is to kind of throw off the cyclical timing of the other alliance, right? And we'll get into the mechanics of it a little bit later, but basically you just want to make it so if the opposing alliance has like a nice alternating, motion to their cycles where they're only getting one robot in and another robot's leaving, right? Your goal needs to be to try to get those two robots in the same place at the same time. That's going to jam them up, and you're going to have a lot more success that way. And then opportunistic defense isn't necessarily, that's kind of a broad term, necessarily like a strict kind of defense. But in match, there's a few things that we are constantly checking for, especially in games like 2024 and 2023, where you have full field cycling, um, where we're looking to see, you know, hey, is there a really good team that we can go 1-for-1 with, which means, we're taking seconds out of our time to play defense. If we can, you know, drain them of an equal number of seconds, we consider that a win, right? Because they're going to score more than us. If you go back to like that, your your equation for defense, you'll see it's a net positive for our lines. So that's something our drive coach would be looking for opportunities to kind of jump in just for a few seconds to play some defense. The other thing is steals. Obviously, any chance you have to go get a steal, it's more game pieces for your alliance, less game pieces for them, right? Again, you do have to be careful because a lot of times, A, there's penalties involved if you're caught in the wrong area, and B, you might be wasting more time than you need if you're driving across the field when you don't have to. So the benefits maybe aren't always as high as you'd think they would be. All right. So I've got some kind of interactive examples here just to kind of keep things interesting. So let's say you're in qual match 5, right? And here are some numbers from this year's game of teams on your alliance and teams on the opposing alliance, right? And let's say, you're looking to do your cooperation, maybe score a couple in the net, and just fill up the reef as much as possible. Okay. I guess a couple of questions. So first of all, which robot on your alliance should be focusing more on algae, given the numbers you see here? And B, should you send a defender, or do you think there will be defense played against you? Anyone can jump in here if they have any ideas. No wrong answers here, of course, because this is not a real match. But feel free to drop anything in the chat or come off mute. And 422 kids, you're allowed to talk as well. In fact, please do. Let's see, what do we got? Yes, Jared, that is exactly what I'm getting at. So, let's see, we've got, yes, Gabe. So teammate 1, the kind of cost of doing algae is a lot less than it is for your team, right? They're going 1-for-1, exactly the number of algae that they score, and then plus the number of coral that they score is always going to add up to 10, right? So you take away 1 coral, you add 1 algae. For our team, though, right, it doesn't exactly math out like that. When you're getting these higher algae numbers, there's a much larger decrease in the number of coral, right? So because of that kind of opportunity cost, right? And I know like the point system could have some twists in this, right? But the opportunity cost of your team doing algae versus your teammate doing algae is much higher. So I wouldn't lean into that as much. And in terms of defense, Ari is asking, is teammate 2 ground or loader? Let's say for the sake of this that they are ground. What do we think? In terms of coral, ground coral. Because they only play coral. Probably defense on teammate 1. Maybe. I could see it, but which one of them do you think is playing defense? And do you think that's quite worth it? Yeah, right. Because, their scoring is pretty similar to them, right? Yeah, I think if they were to send anyone, they would send opponent two. But this is just my take on it. Yeah, again, no right answers here. Because kind of your game piece totals, if you're just looking at the averages, are fairly ballpark similar. Both teams should really be going like absolutely for the win here, and this is kind of within the error margin of this, right? I don't think teammate two could, you know, prevent as much scoring as they could just score, right? And because of that, you know, we would have better spacing. And so I don't think our alliance would need to play defense here either. Again, depends on the game, but that's kind of the equation you'd have to work out before you actually drew up your whole match strategy. All right, let's just look at one more. Okay. All right. So in this example, let's say all three of your teams are loader station only. Okay. So let's say in this one, do you think there will be defense played?
I think, yeah, because looking at opponent number two and how they don't contribute as much as their other teammates, but compared to an alliance where you have three teammates that can contribute a lot of different points, I think it'd be beneficial to send opponent two over to play defense to potentially slow down the Red Alliance. That would
Yep.
just be my gut reaction.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And let's just say I didn't give you more info here. Let's say scouting data does say that opponent two has been playing defense in every single match, right? And all these coral are just, they jump off one in auto and that's it. So with that information, do we think our alliance should play any defense? A bit of a loaded question. Cooper, I don't hate the idea. It kind of depends on the game here, right? But this year, I don't love counter defense because typically you're just sitting in front of a alliance station. It's pretty hard to counter that. Um, if you're saying counter defense is trying to stop a defender from doing their defense. If I would say though is because I did mention, and it's not on the page, but let's say if all three of these teams are feeder station teams, right? There's a good chance that you're going to see a significant slowdown in terms of your coral scoring if you have all three robots really focusing on that, you know. So I would say you might want to slide yourselves over and play D. That was originally the idea I was going for. I realized I made these numbers a little high and didn't quite balance it out correctly because there's an argument like, hey, you won't be able to cut off that many cycles for them, but you also kind of have to add in that part of, you know, there's four robots on one side of the field, only two loader stations. We're going to be defending our teammates if we stay on this side of the field. So, uh, it's a tricky situation, right? There's not always a clear answer You know, if this was another team, I'd totally get if they didn't want to go play defense. That is kind of how it is often in realistic situations, though, right? You might be a perfectly capable scoring team, but it still might be more optimal for your alliance for you to just get out of the way and slow the other alliance down as much as you can. Okay, so that's kind of like pre-match. Yeah. Oh, yes. I'll go back for a second. Yeah, I did also want to call out. Yeah, we're we're averaging 52 coral as an alliance, right? And this doesn't give you like L1 breakdowns and all of that, but you're well into your L1 here. There's only 36 spots between L2 and L4. So that's another thing to think about. You know, you could easily fill up everything and depending on if your alliance can't score L1, then you're running out of places. So then you definitely want to go play defense. So let's go to in match, right? And this isn't as much of an easy one to kind of cover because there's just so much stuff that could happen, right? But this is where kind of going back to drive practice, ideally your driver has an idea of what they need to be doing, right? Given, you know, basically a playbook that you should be practicing of, here's the different strategies that we run depending on what we decided in, pre-match strat. They should be like, okay, I'm running this one. I've practiced that 50 times, or I'm playing defense. I've practiced that 50 times, right? Ideally, your coach shouldn't need to be micromanaging them. It shouldn't be anything completely new, right? What we have our coach do is, and there is, some, hey, score here, but it's typically not that, right? We like to stay alert at the time, you know, make sure we're hitting our RP thresholds, calling out, is there defense happening? Do we need to pivot to defense for some reason? And also looking at our teammates saying, hey, are they actually, you know, doing what we planned? As a part of that, you know, you're not always going to be able to, I guess, unlock yourself from your own team. So it's good if you kind of practice that as the season goes on. If you're a drive coach, even when you don't need to check in on other teams, just checking in, making sure you have kind of a full grasp on everything that's going on, because obviously your driver should really just be focused on you, right? So we have our drive coach just call out intervals of 30 seconds. Last 30 seconds, they're going to get a full countdown. Just make sure, our driver has that rhythm that they've practiced all year, and make sure that they're actually not running out of time accidentally, because that does happen. And the other thing we're a lot of times doing is looking for, steals or hitting game pieces, or as I was talking about before, like opportunistic bump opportunities, right? That, the driver really should just be focused on their cycles. They're not going to be looking at those as much. Drive coach should be on those, right? In match, typically we found as we were like going through the year, we like to score the easiest points first, not the most points first, the easiest points first, right? And what we're kind of trying to maximize here is our points per second, right? So we score the close L4s, right? Typically we go like face by face, right? And top to bottom, right? So we start close, go L4, 3, 2. We don't do L1 immediately because that's not sufficient for us. And also, if you're doing competition, you don't need to, right? And then we go to the next face, fill it up, next face, fill it up. And what's nice about that is it helps our driver and our human players kind of stay in rhythm, right? Get equal bursts of speed, right? And then you get longer sprints, and then your longest sprints, right? And that just kind of, those repeated actions help them, understand immediately what their next move is going to be and help them get all of their timings perfect. Okay. And kind of with that, typically you don't want to have a strategy going in that's too reliant on specifics. And we'll get into that as we get into the Elam strategy a little bit too. But it's better to just have a good rhythm going than trying to figure out, okay, I just scored that piece. Where does the next one go? You know, okay, I've done my L3s. I'm supposed to do L1s next, but there's still an L2, and it's just too much, math trying to go on in your driver's head. You don't want that, right? You want it to be as smooth as possible. And the last thing is, we talked about goal setting for the match. Now stick to it, right? You might have a strategy that you want to stick to, but then something happens with your teammates or someone breaks, you might need to pivot yourself to get that goal finished, right? It's finishing your RPs, or maybe your teammate can't finish your L4, so just be ready to pivot to that to get those maximum points or get those maximum RPs, whatever it is that you want to do that match. Okie dokie. So this is something I love to do, right? Video review. This has been great for us. We think not enough teams do it. So hopefully everyone out of this either already does video review or will walk away planning to do video review next year, right? But for every single quals match, every single elims match, right? We watch the entire match back and we're looking for, small things we can adjust, like, hey, human players, we should be throwing just a half second earlier, or okay, we missed this algae because we were driving forward when we shot it. All right, let's make sure we're, sitting still. The other thing we're doing is we're also evaluating ourselves, right? Timing cycles, being like, okay, if we're clean, we can hit these front side cycles in 2.5 seconds pretty consistently. The backside cycles take us like 6 seconds, right? So it kind of gives us an idea of the relative value of each of those, which helps us in alliance selection and so on, right? And as I mentioned, this isn't just for the drivers. This can help your human players with their timing, helps their drive coaches see things that they might have missed. Even programmers with autos or, any kind of automated routine, they might be able to be like, oh, well, if we put the elevator up a half second earlier, we're driving, stopping, and then putting the elevator up. If we put it up earlier, then everything would be in the perfect position right when we got there and we were all ready to score, right? Those kinds of small efficiencies are kind of not always obvious if you're just watching with your own eyes. So watch all of your matches back as they're happening, and you will get slowly better and better as the event goes on, right? And here's an example, first match video of the day. All right, so this was one of our matches at our second event. Okay, I'll full screen it. And shoot, where are we? We're up here. Okay, let me go. I hate this. I always try to use the arrow keys. I was doing this last time. So no audio. So we are here, right? And you can see here. Well, first of all, okay, I don't love that. It took us a while to get that coral funneled, right? Maybe that would be something we're looking at. Why is that getting caught, right? But right here, what happened was we missed our previous coral, right? And that landed here. All right. Our drivers can't see that. Okay. But because of that, because this coral's here, let me go back. Let me not use the arrow keys. We weren't able to get all the way up into the reef, and then this coral is now nicely lodged in a robot. And if I go forward just through the match, you will see, yeah, no, that thing's stuck in there. We don't get that out. And so we were, brainstorming ideas, how can we prevent this from happening in the future? What we came up with was, okay, if this happens and someone in the crowd sees it, we're going to start just chanting our drive coach's name. All right. And he'll understand that that is what that means. So we don't go try to score immediately. Instead, we come in and sweep it out and then score. I will say we never ended up using it in the year. The only other time it happened was a practice match, and we weren't ready for it to happen, but it was still, nice to have something that we wouldn't really have thought of unless we really watched this back, figured out exactly what happened here, and then brainstorm solutions. Okie dokie. Yeah, Ari, we'll get to that. I'm gonna open it up for questions and take a quick 3-minute break as well. Um, so does anyone have any questions before we kind of get into Elam Strat on anything I've just talked about? All right, I'm gonna pause recording. Let's say 6:25, we're gonna go again. I need some water. Okay, a couple questions. Why is completing a face rather than going for all the L4s more efficient? This is a very team by team based thing, right? For us, yeah. Ari kind of hit on it where our driver was just so practiced at going, you know, face by face that that was just, the easiest way for him to stay in rhythm, right? We would like early in the year practice kind of, doing those kind of full laps. But what we found was, the timing on the human players is definitely easier when, you're doing the same sprint 6 times rather than doing, this sprint and then this sprint and then all the way back and then repeating. And it's kind of the same thing with just like driver muscle memory, where, if you're doing the same exact driving motion 6 times in a row, you're gonna, accelerate the right amount more consistently. We had pretty heavy automations, so getting that rhythm right wasn't too difficult. He was barely driving. He'd drive forward an inch, press the auto score button, drive back, press the auto intake button. But it still makes it mentally easier than having to do that. We'll get into when I go into Elam's match strat, kind of why I didn't love going all the way around one level at a time. But yeah, I mean, it's not too much more efficient, right? Maybe your team considers the L4s like the easiest points. Those are what you should go for first. Then I'm not saying that is the hard rule. I'm saying for us, the easiest points were going face by face. Okay, Jared had a question. How would you approach a pre-match strategy if you don't have data? Yeah. So, I think first thing, if you don't have data, if it's like late in an event, I just ask some people. They probably say no. They might say no, but if you can get data, that's good. I know maybe you don't trust the reliability of it. Right. So for me, what I do is I would just pull up some match videos if we have them of any teams that are, in that match, and just watch them briefly, get an understanding of, how good do I think they are based off eye test. You're not going to have numbers. That's going to be about as good as you can get. I also personally, we were doing pre-scouts, at least for district championship and for worlds, which kind of give us a starting point for those initial matches. So we had that data by then. If that's not something you can pull off, you can use Statbotics just to get a general idea. Again, not perfect. probably good enough if you don't have other options. Thanks. Also, what criteria would make you not pick a well-performing team? This is just like a alliance selection kind of more general question. Is that what you're getting at? Can I save this one for the end of the presentation because I do want to pick it up, but I will remind me to get back to that if I forget. All right, let me take one more sip of water. Restart the recording. Oh, I paused the screen share, not the recording. Okay. Not that I care. I was talking that whole time. Think I'd have this down by now, but I don't. Okay. All right. Back at it. Elam's match strat. So coordination is the main difference maker, or the main thing that's going to be, largely different between quals and elims, right? As I mentioned before, proper spacing can be the absolute difference maker in any match. And in elims, you really should be getting this right. Hopefully you picked an alliance with a certain strategy in mind, with, you know, 3 robots, hopefully at least 2 who can really function, maybe 1, especially early events, maybe less reliable. But you really want to get your spacing right, right? And we choreograph more heavily in elims than we do in quals for sure, right? So we use paths and zones to try to get those, first movements correct and try to kind of plan out how our repeated cycles are going to be. And we're looking to kind of, as I mentioned before, get that nice rhythm of, one team in one area at a time, especially in your full field cycling games. So that way they're not getting interrupted, right? So that what that would look like is, as one team is leaving the loading station in 20 in Reefscape, another team's pulling in, and they're leaving once the other team's coming back from scoring. Having that nice rotation increases your efficiency in a big way. You can also just do this, through spacing, through zoning, where, teams are only going to take one piece of the station. They're going to try to stay out of the other side's half. There's ways if you're, going for that timing based cycle that, you can use what called waiting moves to kind of get that, you know, alternation right, where you either play a secondary game piece. So if a team is, going in for coral and you don't want to be going in at the same time as them, you go pick up an algae, right? And we plan that out beforehand. Or in 2024, if one team's going into the loading station to start like the passing cycle, like if we had 2 passers and 1 scorer, we really want that alternation, right? If one team's going in, we might play defense for a second or go to the middle of the field if there's a piece we can race for. Anything like that just to try to get that timing right. But you do need to have kind of plans in case the timing is thrown off, right? So in 2024, if things got jammed up, if you had a cleanup robot and 2 passers, there were times when the cleanup would run out of notes. You need to have a plan, whether they go for a steal if it's there, or just start full field cycling for if the timing gets thrown off, right? And just as an example here, I wanted to highlight kind of what bad coordination and good coordination looks like. All right, so this is 2023, and we actually happen to be on a quals alliance in one match that would end up being the exact same alliance in elims. So we can kind of watch the difference between how that quals kind of coordination worked. And I will say, like, we figured we had this match, like 3 good teams, whatever. So we kind of just went out there in quals and we were just like, yeah, let's just score. Okay. And then you'll see there's a pretty clear difference come elims, right? There's a large difference in scoring between the 2 matches, right? Like this one, we put up like 140 something. I don't remember. We can 155. There it is. And then in elims, we were putting up 212 multiple times. Right. So one small thing here, right? This is something we hadn't talked about, but so 6377 Howdy bots, they like having their cones like here, lying down, kind of facing this way, ideally, right? Because they just come in and sweep it up off the ground, right? What we just did is a no-no. We came in and we swept those all the way off to the side. So now they really can't, those are all the way jammed in the corner. Really can't get those. Luckily, they have a cube sitting right here, and they're just going to play that, right? And, again, here, like we're both trying to go over the charge station for a split second there. And now, slamming into our teammate there. And again, kind of similar deal with the cones. They're kind of fumbling around because, they didn't have the cone lying their way. They just said, okay, fine, we'll just go get that cube. But overall, things are a little messy, right? Similar deal here. They had to go all the way in there, right? Once we actually plan this out, right? We go through, and first thing we do is we say, okay, how is the field going to look coming out of autonomous? Okay. Ideally, it's clear, and you'll see it's clear. Okay. So that means we need all three of our robots flying through here. Okay. So luckily, they hadn't scored their last game piece. So that's lets them do that while us two are flying over here. And immediately, okay, they're gonna get their cone, right? And their kind of path is supposed to be like along here while we are kind of sweeping in behind them and trying to get to here. Because the issue is we both feed from the single substation, right? So this is like a choke point for us. So here you can see, again, timing isn't perfect. And now, they miss, happens to kind of help us out a little, right? But here we're pathing in a way that we just don't collide, right? And you can see I think it's maybe later in the match, but there's a couple of moments where, it looks like we're about to hit and we actually, way more mindful of where our teammates are, right? So they're rolling these cubes out here. We're coming in, we swept that cone past a little bit, but that's okay because they were playing that cube. Okay. And see, we're still scoring. Like right here, we let them out while we grab that cube and we're back. Okay. And so that's kind of what the idea is having that coordination is really what we're spending a majority of the time on in our, pre-match strategy for elims. We can go next slide. And again, yes, video review. Stress it again. We use it in elims. We use it more in elims. Okay, because now we're not just watching ourselves or watching our alliance as a whole. We're seeing, okay, were we maintaining proper spacing? Was there a defender coming across, and did we, stick to the plan well enough? Do we need to tweak the plan? So we are watching every match after it happens. I will say, if you lose, I think first match, you don't have a lot of time to get back in line before your next match starts. So you're gonna have to do this pretty fast. The other thing we do is we also film our opponent's matches from who we're going to be playing next, right? So obviously, you don't always know who your next match is going to be in elims. If you're playing first match, you don't know who you're going to play first. Depends on whether you win or lose. If you're playing second match and you're watching the first match is actually when that's more relevant. So if we're playing second match, if you win it, you're playing the winner first match. If you lose it, you're playing the loser first match. So I film that first match, and then I'm looking at, okay, are there easy ways that we can throw off their timing by playing defense. I'm looking at, again, how's that match going to end out of auto? And are there, pieces that we need to be racing for in 2024? What auto are they running? And, how can we kind of counter that? Do we have the autos on our alliance to counter that? So watching your opponent's matches with video also will help you see those small details. So film your matches. I know some events they're better than others about getting, match video up quickly. If it's streamed on YouTube, you can always go back to the stream replay if it's up. Twitch, you're not so lucky. But having your own video, very nice to have. All right. And overall, the goal is to quickly determine whether you need to make major changes to the strategy that you just ran in order to win your upcoming match. Okay, so there's kind of two situations typically in elims, right? Typically, you're either favored or you're trying to pull off an upset. There are some real 50-50, toss-ups, in which case you typically don't need to do anything too special, right? The thing I want to, stress here for your favorites is you want to minimize that opportunity cost. And a lot of this burden does fall in your alliance selection, but your top picks should really be leaning fully into what they are best at. And if they aren't doing that, you're evening the playing field, right? And so this is a bad example, but it's the example I'm going to give. All right. We lost this match, but that's not what I'm trying to get at here. Okay. These are two of the minimum top 5 teams in the world. Okay. There are no top 5 teams on this alliance. I know this match does not look close, but if you actually take a look at the coral counts, you're like, they scored the same number of coral, blue and red. It's the same number. Now these teams are way better. Why is that even close? If you look at the algae, sure, it's different, but that's more because we were missing than they were scoring more, right? There's actually like a pretty large gap in algae there that is a little bit deceiving, right? So why was this match close? You're like wondering to yourself. If you watch, and I just pulled up Einstein Finals tiebreaker, right? Where Madtown, their alliance obviously ends up winning. Right? If you watch what Madtown's strategy is they start the match, they're just playing algae, which they're decent at algae, but they're not significantly better than the average, world's elims team, right? They're good. Their ground intake is solid. They're fairly fast. They place consistently. It's accurate, right? And you can see they're struggling with it here. Okay, that's fine. You need to be doing your algae or else you're going to get stolen from. But if we keep going forward, you'll see they spend the whole match playing L1. You might be thinking to yourself, yeah, their L1 is really good, right? It is. It's really good. They can stack really well. It's pretty fast. But is it that fast? If you're actually comparing it to some other teams, you're going to see it really isn't. They actually scored less game pieces than Jack and the Bot by a good bit. I think they scored like 23 or 4. I don't remember the exact number. Jack and the Bot scored 30 plus. Orbit scored 30 plus. High Tide was mid 20s. Right. Now, I will say they were kind of forced to play this role where they're, only playing L1. But typically, Madtown is a team who's scoring closer to 30 plus game pieces a match. I don't think they're hitting, let's say 27, 28, right? So they're costing themselves a few cycles by playing the strategy that they're playing. Obviously, they won the world championship. I'm not saying that's not what they should have been doing, but the matches were much closer because they couldn't lean into their biggest advantage, which is when they're just cycling coral, scoring over the back. with this L1, they have to turn every time they want to score, right? Unless it's, right next to the reef, facing the reef. Every time they want to pick it up, they got to turn, score, pick it up, turn, score, right? Whereas if they're not doing that, they're about 3 times faster, right? So if you're not utilizing your largest advantage, it evens the playing field. You'll hear me talk about it in just a second, but this is also a trap that we fell into a little bit at district championships, right? Our team, because we were, our plan was to play that exact role of, okay, let's hit our auto, then let's play algae, then let's L1. We learned that that's not really what we want to be doing at Worlds because that's not where our biggest advantages are. It just happened that Madtown really couldn't pick a very good L1 bot because there weren't any available, right? The two that they were going to go for just got scooped up right before them in the line selection. Right. So these tasks all kind of typically the best teams weren't that much faster. And of course there's, exceptions to it, right? Like your Switch in 2018, yeah, 254 was the best Switch bot in the world as well. Okay. The gear runners, the really good teams were really fast, right? But there were a lot of good gear runners. Right. But the point is you need to be keeping those advantages if you're favored. Don't the other point is you don't want to put your second picks at a large disadvantage to give your first picks a small advantage, right? So this is kind of countering that a little bit where, you know, you could say, okay, sure, Madtown could have been scoring L2 through L4, but what are you going to do with 4272, whose L1 really isn't that great, right? And this is why I think Madtown is a-okay doing what they did instead of, forcing their second pick into a role that they really weren't good at, right? And this, again, all of this kind of mainly applies to the top teams, like at an event. If you are, trying to pull off an upset, it's it's not going to be as applicable. And the last thing is always plan for surprises, right? You'll see in a second if someone is playing surprise defense on you, you need to have a plan. As I was talking about before, you need to have contingencies for those kinds of things. All right. So the other thing when you're favored is you don't want to have what I'm referring to as a fragile strategy, right? And these are, strategies where if something goes wrong in the match, you're just scrambling and scrambling and you're not going to be able to stick to it at all, right? A lot of times, this could be because you're missing game pieces or, disabling temporarily for just a few seconds, or if someone's playing defense. And often over choreographed path planning is to blame. Okay. And yes, Jared, we're going to look at this match. So it's interesting. We have representatives from all three teams on our district championship alliance here, and I think it's probably safe to say everyone would agree like our original strategy was a little too complicated and a little fragile, right? If everything went perfectly according to plan, it probably would have worked out fine. Okay, but what you're going to see here is our auto isn't looking too great. Okay, yeah, now we're just getting two ourselves. So I'll talk about originally, right? The plan is, let me just kind of get to a good spot and pause. What just happened? Just restarted everything. So originally the plan is, okay, out of auto, we should have, 422 hitting the 4 game pieces and 449 has their 2 up here. So we should have 6. It only leaves 6 more. So we'd initially would have 449 kind of sweep around and fill in these L4s while we're playing and just doing all 6 algae. And then while 449's kind of doing these L4s, then we have 8590 kind of following and doing their L3s and 2s because 8590 is very fast at L3s and 2s, but they cannot score L4s, right? So we're kind of, coming up with these complex paths and this kind of rotational action where we're trying to stay out of each other's way, right? Well, we're picking up a ball, we don't want someone else scoring on that same face, so kind of just this this spinny cycle, and we'll see. It just doesn't all work out that well. And the other thing I do want to call out, going back to the point of lean into your advantages, is 422, we were the best choral scorer at that event, is like pretty good amount, right? But, you know, and again, some of it was just the way alliance selection played out. We were having to do all six algae, right, off the reef. And that kind of killed our, advantage that we had, right? Because 8592 was just as good and far more accurate of an algae score than we were. So ideally, we wouldn't be doing that. Um, the way things ended up, though, this is how it worked out. And you can see, like, okay, like we're trying to stay out of 449's way, but because there's extra pieces on game four or on L4 that they're going to need to score, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And right now it looks okay, but yeah, you can see here um, our algae, we missed that one. And yeah, so we're behind a pretty good amount here. Partially just because, we were missing, but things it's a little bit of a mess, right? We've got coral kind of everywhere. 8590s, trying their best to not knock it, and having a strategy that doesn't break down as much when you know things are missing would have been much nicer, right? Because we're getting coral out here for 9 to be able to score. Yeah, timing was kind of all thrown off from human players because you know everything was just a little bit out of whack, right? So did I not include? I thought I did. Um, let's just pull it up. We ended up in finals 2. What am I doing? Going to a bit of a simpler strategy, right? And this is the wrong event, so let's not watch that. Right, and we did a similar thing in finals 1 as well. Right, where even though auto doesn't fully hit, it is definitely better than last time, right? We start off with, okay, 8590 is just going to do a couple game pieces this time, right? See 1908's over here on defense. That means, okay, once we've scored a couple of algae, we are going to send 8590 on the merry way to play defense themselves, right? Much simpler, even though, 8590 is super capable scorer. It just opens things up a good amount more for us and for our teammate, especially when we have another defender here, right? And so those are things like going back to that problem earlier, where even if you have a very capable scorer, 3 robots all trying to score does not always mean their scores are going to be additive. So going back, yeah, long story short, simplify as much as possible. Sure. Yeah, Jared mentioned the 51-15 contingency. So, yeah, in finals, if we had dropped a match, the plan was to bring in 51-15, who was a more dedicated defender than 85-90. The main thing, they just had a deep climb. So, They could give us that, point boost at the end of the match. We didn't end up losing it. We end up winning. A little bit of luck because 85-92 unfortunately broke at the end. It probably would have been pretty close if they didn't. Um, but this match or this strategy still was more successful for us for sure. Okie dokie. Let's see. Okay, on the other end of the spectrum. Okay, upsets. Now, there isn't any kind of catch-all rule to how to pull off an upset, obviously, right? It's unlikely. You know, if you're going into a match against a higher seed, depending on the way a line selection went, of course, a lot of times it's going to be pretty difficult to win. So you might need to switch things up. Again, do your analysis, say, okay, if we play things, straight up normally the way we were playing last match or the way I expect us to play, if we have a good shot at winning, just go for that. But you might need to pull out some kind of unorthodox strategies, right? So a lot of games have, ways to slow the other alliance down without directly playing robot to robot defense. Whether it's, this year you had algae theft, which a lot of times, not only are you going +1 on really like a net +2, right? Because they're losing an algae, you're scoring an algae, net +2 on algae, but you're also causing a disruption to them if they are, trying to slow you down, right? And that might throw off their rhythm. 2024, similar deal. If they're playing passing strats, you know, you go steal those passes. That's how we played our first two matches in elims. Won those. It went great. We broke. Stuff happens. In 2018, you could also attack the opponent's switch. And we'll take a quick gander at this video. So I know some of you probably too young to know exactly what this game is, but essentially you have these cubes, you have some seesaws. Okay, you want seesaw to go in your color, right? And for every second that you have the seesaws, you get points. So what you could do was you could put cubes on the other side of the field on your opponent's switch and kind of catch them off guard, right? We're not always expecting it. So a little bit of context in this. This is the 1 seed. All right. These two teams, really, really good. Us, it's a good alliance, but we only won the first or second semifinal tiebreaker because they got a red card, right? Their names are still in yellow because of that. So we decided we wanted to throw them the curveball here. And we actually weren't playing in the first two matches, so we got subbed in for the captain, who's 71. It's pretty goated team. And we were a very versatile scorer that year, right? So we could score on any of the seesaws, but we kind of specialized a little more in scoring on the switches, which are the lowdown ones, right? And so the other alliance hadn't really planned for that. And so what the deal with the game is on your side you have this nice pyramid of cubes, and really you can either choose to score them on the switch or put them in what's called the vault, where you get access to power-ups, right? It's a little safer to play this, but you're not going to be maximizing your points if you're not scoring in the vault. So pretty much immediately after the match starts, we slide our way on over and we get to work. And you can see they're a little slow to react, right? They only have set 3 cubes on this side of the switch, and they're still scoring on the vault, right? And so you can see it's about to go neutral, right? You can see this is blinking right here, which means they have control over it. Now they're trying to counter it, but it's a little late, right? No real panic from them yet, but uh-oh, they're also losing the scale. So okay, now we gotta go over here and try to score on this. And this was the first overall pick on the division, right? And so now, this team's just trying to slow us down because they don't have too many other cubes here that they can score. Okay, they got that one. But because they scored so much over here, they weren't really ready with their contingency plan on what to do if this happens. And now they have no real cubes that are, or not enough cubes that are easily scoreable. And we have completely distracted them from the big seesaw in the middle. So even though, they came over and they actually flipped our side too, now this is where, either team can score points off this one. The two side seesaws, you can only score points if it's yours. So we're not getting points from this, but we're just denying them. Right. But because we distracted them from here, it's like, uh-oh. Now they're in just like full panic mode. Okay. Now endgame's coming along, and now we're deciding, okay, now we can get our points or cubes in the vault, right? A little smarter than trying to force that beginning of the match. You can see the score, we're still down here, but with the way things work out, the other detail, if you know the game, use the arrow keys again. This is now the wrong match because I use the arrow keys. If you know the game, you know that this is the levitate. They did not get to use theirs because we pulled them off of the vault, right? And because of that, where is it? Yeah, we end up winning, upset the 1 seed. We move on to division finals. Yeah, we got clobbered there, but still got a medal. So that's the kind of strategy that you need to be looking for. Not every game is going to have something like that, unfortunately. Like this year, it was pretty tough. You could send a defender, but especially when they have two ground intakes, it's like, okay, well, what's that really going to do? Uh, we thought about like, okay, can we steal coral? But with the hopes of causing a drought, right? To try to limit, if we steal like 15 coral, then they only have, 48 coral that they can score on their side. So, you know, now they're getting capped. Realistically, stealing that many is just impossible. So that's why we didn't go for that. Algae theft works a little bit, but not as much as, something like stealing passes in 24 or, that does. Okay, so use, the unexpected strategy when, it seems like all hope is lost. The other thing is like if you need something kind of last ditch effort, you can go for climb blocks. Again, different games, gonna lend itself to it differently. But this is something that you can see when you're doing your video review is, if you're looking for, hey, this team is leaving a climb really late and they only are leaving themselves one spare second, that might be a good signal to try a climb block. So this was another Division 1 seed going down. This is one of my good friends' teams on 2791, was really, really good this year. And as we go to the end of the match, you can see here they're getting defended. And right here is like they get a little greedy, right? There's still a decent amount of time, but now this defender has them in a really good position. They can't go all the way around here in that time, right? And their climb is not the fastest, right? So there's 5 seconds left, and because they slowed them down there, they got parked. They, can't really see, but they are touching the ground. That climb is not up, and they end up painfully losing on a tiebreaker because of 3 penalty points. So that's the other kind of thing you need to be looking for watching video. All right, I believe we're on to, I think this is our last real slide here. And this is kind of going back to the defense side. In elims, you will see a lot of defense played. Again, typically going to be, most times zone. If there's one really good team in an event, maybe you man up on them. If it is man defense, I did just want to show, here is how, this is where I put finals one match too. So going back to this match, I just wanted to show because I thought this was our driver did a pretty good job of working under defense here. Okay. So really you should have what I'm going to call a juke and a counter juke, a move and a counter move, right? That's all you really need in your bag, right? So what that means is you need a trick to, you know, make your opponent think you're going one way and go the other. Then you also need a trick to make your opponent think you're going one way, go that way, but make your opponent think you're going one way, fake like you're going the other way, and then come back and actually go that way. Right. And so you'll see it here. All right. So now they're into position right here. Right. And right. It takes them a little bit to fully get settled here. But right here, you can see, okay, right there, little bit cheeky, hard to see, but he just fakes this way for a slight second and then cuts back. Right there, fully switches sides, leaves them behind again, going back to the where they're not. Right here, just switching, you know, trying to just minimize the hits that they can get on them. Okay, there's a point in this match. I might have missed it. Right, I think it's right. No, not right there. Okay. So we've run out of coral over here. So now we need to force our way over here. Where was that spin move I was watching earlier? Right there. Right. And so, they don't know that we're out of coral here. So they still think, hey, we're trying to fully switch. I think actually our human player just ran and grabbed some. Right. But our driver cuts that way, spins back the other way. Right. Leaves them without getting a clean hit on them. Right. And we did that a lot throughout this year in terms of just two moves, your straight cut and then your cut spin back. Okay. So that's really the best way to kind of counter man defense. You also just want to have space to operate, right? And that might mean you sending a defender of your own, right? Because if you have three robots trying to score, you're not going to have enough space to do all those jukes and stuff, and they're just going to get plenty of clean hits on you. The other style of defense we talked about is zone, right? And this is where, the goal is to try to get into that like, switchy rhythm and keep it, right? If you can, basically take turns playing man, essentially, right? Where they're going to have to, try to keep up with one robot at a time, and if they're getting juked out as the other robot's coming in, they're going to be able to get through without getting focused on, right? You want to have it in a way where your teammates, you're not interacting with each other, but you're still not letting the defending robot get clean looks at both robots, right? I'm not saying you send both at one time, but as the other robot's coming out, essentially, ideally, and it's really you're only going to be able to pull this off at like high level worlds once robots are really consistently hitting those cycles. But ideally, it's as one robot's coming out, the other one's going in, right? That way, they don't get clean looks at a full part of a cycle for both robots. Okay. Countering steals isn't always easy, right? This year, if there's team stealing algae, that needed to be your focus. Pretty self-explanatory. In 2024, you really just needed to like use resource management well, right? And that means kind of going through the planning in your head before the match, like, okay, if there's two notes starting there, we don't need to pass two more notes over there because that robot that's scoring isn't going to be, scoring four notes in a second. They're obviously just going to come over and snatch that and leave. Right. And so that's the kind of thinking that you need to get into if there's a robot that you see on film doing a lot of stealing, or if you have a large advantage going into a match and you suspect steals are going to come into play. Okay, and the last thing in this presentation is other. What does other mean? All right, and this is actually one of my favorite things I've ever picked up on my time at FRC, but this is why I love video reviews. So geez, I don't know if audio passes through, but hopefully, sorry if that just attacked your ears. Okay, so setting the stage, finals one. Okay, 85-92 is really good. They have probably, as I've said it before, the best drive coach in the district. Okay, they're a very strategically smart team. Okay, they're underdogs in this match for sure. Okay, our alliance has been putting up higher scores, consistently throughout the event. So, as we get into this match, all right, let's get in here. All right, they're going to send a defender over here. Right. One nice thing our team has is we have two human players. Okay, so typically it's not that big a deal if there's a defender, right? Because, we have two human players and, you know, two robots. So if we both need to cycle to the same side, hopefully that's the side that we have two humans. Now, match is going on and I'm, looking, okay, our human player's doing a good job of feeding both, but it's tougher. It's slowing us down a little bit for certain. And, you know, we can't get into our rhythms that we want to get into because he's having to kind of split his focus between two robots, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, why don't we just switch over a human player? Our drive coach has the same idea. Okay, so human player switches, and that's suspicious. Okay, why did they switch sides? I mean, yeah, they're both robots over there. But now, they're defending the side with two human players again. Interesting. If I go back to where they're originally defending, right? And this is when I was kind of watching this and when I kind of picked up on this, right? This is when we originally switch our human player from over there to over here. See him moving, right? They get a good hit on 1629. Then instead of holding that, they switch sides. And then later in the match, we can see immediately once too far. Immediately once he switches sides again, they follow him. So I said, it looks like they are manned up on a human player, right? It's a smart, right? Forcing us both to go through and feed on one player, which is, throwing our rhythm off. And, they're going to try to get through, but they're going to make it tough on them. So we suspect maybe, we're not certain. Maybe they're manned up on the human player. What do y'all have any ideas for counter strategies that you could possibly use to play against that if that was the case? I know Ari has an idea. Yes. I actually haven't, but we'll see in a second. What if you were in this situation, what would your team do to, you know, try to counter that? Anyone in the chat other than Ari? Yes, I like that idea a lot. Have the human player switch in between, juke around. Now, I will say execution could have been better. Okay. But that was kind of the gist of the idea. We were just going to have them just keep switching back and forth. Okay. And it takes them a little bit to actually get over on defense. So I'm going to switch forward. Okay. But going here, and we can see, okay, here comes a defender. Sorry, Gakko's human player now. All right. They're following. Okay. All right. That seemed pretty close. All right. They were going back. Okay. They're still following. All right. Let's switch them again. All right. They're still following. And they do get like a decent little hit in there, but essentially, you know, they're trying to, they're focused on on their on our human players so much, and you can see this guy. I think he's kind of like signaling like they're just going back and forth and back and forth, and they haven't really talked about it too much about like what to do in that situation, but they are literally just following back and forth, right? And at this point, I mean, they're not slowing down. They're not slowing down anyway, right? I think ideally, we'd see what would happen if we slowed them down in the middle more. And that would also, give this poor human player a little more rest. But it was, if nothing else, a fun strategy to try, right? We had fun with this. We said, all right, let's get some cardio going. And she was running back and forth and back and forth. And to me, it looked like they were following for sure. So no, I did not. I think I think Casey might have talked to our drive coach, talked to Jesse, who was Newton Squared's drive coach. And I think he did kind of confirm that that was the case. But that was something wasn't totally obvious unless you watched film and actually picked up on the fact like, hey, you know, they look like they're following whenever we're switching. So yeah, Emily's idea. Yeah, I kind of like the idea of using the drive coach as someone confusing. I think you could also. I'm pretty sure it's like legal to like switch shirts, that kind of deal. If they were like literally like follow the blue shirt around, throw them in a throw them in a green shirt or something like that. Um, and yeah, you could play around that in a variety of ways, but it's more the difficult thing picking up on it. And you know, once you have that, that's half the battle. So that's why, you know, every single match, video review deeply. Those are the things we're looking for. And ideally, that's not the drive coach's job to do the video review, right? The initial video review, I'll say. Yes, they absolutely should be looking at it, but immediately after the match ends, you want your strategy folks watching that and coming up with a kind of quicker report, maybe some highlights that they can give to the drive coach, so they're not distracted from too much from coming up with the next match strategy if needed. Okay, I did not want to play that. All right, and lastly, just to put it out there, okay, you can't win them all. All right, so you know sometimes robots break. You know, maybe you don't get your way with the strategy, and the strategy that you end up going with flops completely. Don't be a jerk. Don't be a jerk about it, and just understand. Sometimes you're just gonna lose. All right, the best strategy in the world might still be a loss. Might be guaranteed. So yeah, that's what I got for today. Hopefully you learned something to take away. If this is completely useless for you, I'm sorry. But for now, any questions before I get back to Jared's question I now have in my memory to talk about again? All right. Actually, I'm not checking the chat well enough. All right, Jared, I'm gonna scroll back up, see exactly what you asked for. And we'll kind of get into this more next week because it is a little more alliance focused. What criteria make you not pick a well-performing team? It's a little broad, but in general, I mean, we've had to pass up on a lot of well-performing teams this year. Like at district champs, that was, second pick was definitely a difficult decision. Um, just because there were, so many teams who were performing at a pretty high level who were available. Obviously, 85-90 was one of those teams who were available. Um, we felt that, we'll get into more of the specifics next week. We felt like their cycling ability was, enough of a jump above everyone else who was available. But, you know, at Worlds, even there's really specific strategies that, we were trying to aim for, which meant, we couldn't just take the best team available, right? Like I remember when we were making our second pick at Worlds, 42-72, the team who ended up on the, you know, World Championship Alliance. They were available. We thought that they probably were just the best team in a vacuum. You put them on the field by themselves, they're going to score the most points, but they didn't fit into our alliance that well, right? We already had two funnel bots, and yeah, we could pick up off the ground a little bit at Worlds, but not what we were best at. We didn't want to lean into that too much. So because of that, because we kind of, you know, put ourselves in a situation where we wanted to, you know, maximize our alliance's output, our potential output, and also have a chance, like any chance at beating that one seed, we really needed to pick, you know, someone that would fit in the highest potential strategy, right? And so because of that, we end up going with Spectrum, who's got, you know, ground algae, ground coral, a bajillion degrees of freedom, sick robot, but a little bit riskier than some of the other picks available. And because of that, our second pick, we wanted to pick someone who could fit into a safer version of a strategy that still maximized what us and what Tech Hounds, our first pick, were doing. So we end up going with an algae only team who was pretty good at algae. And, that limited us, right? Because, they couldn't play past a certain point once we'd scored all nine algae on our side. Yeah, they went for steals in the match they played, but um, we wanted to have that fallback option in case things weren't working out with Spectrum. And luckily we did need to call them in for a match, and they did their job perfectly well. Okay. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit. It's just when you're picking for a role, you're going to end up leaving out a good team. All right. So Gabriel asks, score the easiest points from most years as a counterexample. Do cones first. They could turn the loading zone into a ball pit. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a good counterpoint. That was kind of a mainly this year thing, although the point I was somewhat trying to get at, which I didn't really mention, which is good that I bring this back up, is, the reason why you want to score points early in the match rather than going for RP immediately early in the match, you know, is RP is pretty contingent on you functioning throughout the entire duration of the match. It kind of depends on how good your alliance is, but you want to score as many points as possible early on. That way, if you do break at some point in the match, you've maximized the time that you were functioning. There are some, good counterexamples to that. Yeah, 2023, yeah, the like cube flood. Um, some people had floods this year where um you had, you'd score your algae or something, and then or if teams had ground L1 stuff, then they'd try to score everything else and then flood the field with coral. It's not necessarily the easiest not necessarily the easiest cycle, but basically the thing I was trying to get at was front load. That way, if things go wrong, you're not costing yourself as much. Yes, actually, I do want to send out the feedback form. Go pull that up. Actually, I need to have it here. Okay. So yeah, I'll get to these other questions in a second. Let me just send this out once again. If you could fill this out, I would appreciate it greatly. Just helps, in the future as we're doing these probably again next year, if we're doing any more of these later in the year. Uh, Help me understand like what teams want to see. Let me actually put the link in, not in the Chesapeake Slack. That'd be bad. Where's the chat? Is that right? Hold up. One second. Shorten URL. There we go. All right, there we go. Yeah, if you could fill that out. And I put an extra apostrophe in. Just click the link. Try not to copy that. All right, next question. Thoughts on the difference between match strategy for exhibition games, doing their own thing. Yeah, and that's kind of, so the question's kind of asking about games where teams are doing their own thing versus where, you know, there's more teammate interaction in terms of, maybe passing like 2024, 2014. I think that's where a lot of the match strategy in those kinds of games just comes from spacing, right? Just from coordination, choreography, rather than, trying to figure out, hey, you know, we need to be, passing this many times before we all do a full field cycle. Those kinds of like team interactions can be a little more difficult to plan for sure, right? And typically those are a little more like fragile, right? Because you're relying on your teammates being in the right position rather than just you being in the right position. Um, to me, also, I find those, more fun. Uh, you have more chances to kind of branch out and try different strategies, like in 2024, again, going back to stealing and in 2018, kind of, going back to attacking the opponent's switch. I think in those situations, having, a really good strategy team, specifically drive coach, where you can keep your alliance kind of all together on what your objectives are, and that gives you a big advantage. So I think that's kind of the main difference in those kinds of games is in match strategy, since there's so many more variables, matters more when it's like a teammate oriented game rather than pre-match strategy is really all there is to those kind of exhibition, you know, focus on your own thing kind of games, right? Where, you can't just be like score faster. Sure. But it's more about just having your cycles just planned out rather than, actually making different plays. Okay, Gavin. Yeah, what was wrong, Spectrum? Why didn't Bison play in the finals? Great question. So Spectrum, the main thing that was like tough was they're just missing algae. And at World Zealands, that's, you're losing 4 points and you're gifting them 4 points. But the reason that we kept them in for finals and really the reason we picked them is just because they provided our alliance with a much higher ceiling when we were kind of running through the math in our heads, right? if we played Bionic Bison and they scored all their algae, right? It, the numbers didn't really work out with just triple O with them, right? Because, you know, that's leaving us and Tech Hounds to be the only coral scorers where, you know, the other alliance has two of the best coral scorers in the world. And we'd be like basically 1v1ing. We don't think we're even getting a real win on algae. We're not getting any difference made there. But yeah, so essentially we just wanted to have that high ceiling. And the reason that's also kind of the reason that they were playing in the first couple matches as well was basically just because we were like, yeah, let's just get them, you know, try this strategy out to actually have it ready to roll before we try it out for the first time in like finals. The goal with Spectrum kind of was to turn the game into like a stacking match, right? Because you had a cap on scoring and a cap on the number of pieces, and we, you know, saw that if we were working 100% and the other alliance was working 100%, realistically, we should both be completely filling the reef and pretty much completely filling L1. And Spectrum had, you know, ground pickup and a nice long arm, which lets them, you know, reach back and kind of place over already scored L1s. Now, we didn't ever get to that perfect point where we could make it a stacking match because we were having other issues, but we thought that if we could, you know, get into this coral race, we would have a chance against like Madtown, maybe, you know, knocking some off, right? Or Jack in the Bot knocking some off, which, you know, happened in finals one, I think. So that's what was up with that. All right, I'm gonna stop screen sharing. Okie dokie. All right, another question, more alliance focus. My team was expecting to be picked as a late second pick, if at all, but we got picked by Alliance 8 as their pick one. Wanted to lose and not qualify. Can like do Yeah. So that's a great question. The answer is not really. There isn't really something you can do to, you know, avoid getting picked by those lower alliances. It's just the way that the match or that event works. Uh, Tanking is pretty generally looked down upon. It's like sandbagging is the terms a lot of people would use. Teams have been accused of it in the past. You can never prove that anyone's done it. Um, but that's, you know, not something I'm going to recommend. I guess the only the only thing I could like say is try to make your if you want to slide far, try to make yourself appealable or like more appealing as a late second round pick rather than a first. What that might mean changes from year to year. But typically you don't want to just like perform worse, right? So like this year, Worlds, for example, a good L1 score meant more to the top couple seeds than the bottom seeds were more looking at really good algae scores. That's not a great analogy because it doesn't super translate down to your, you know, district level or even DCMP where you had less specialization, at least at district level, right? You know, typically your latest picks were teams who just weren't super functional. There's really not a real GP way to like tell a team to not pick you either. So I wouldn't do that. If you are really concerned about your like capability to, you know, work with another team, a specific team, you could talk about them talk about that with them, but just you do it in a way that's like, you know, understanding that maybe it's more beneficial for them to not pick you as well. Right. But I've been in that situation plenty of times over the years where it's just like you get put in that kind of, you know, dead zone of, you're definitely better than some of the teams who are going to end up qualifying for DCMP because they're winning those matches mainly because of their alliance partners. The best you can do is just try to come up with an out of the box strategy in elims and just hope it works. Yep. Unfortunately, it just is the way it is. All right. Any other questions? If not, it is 7:30. So I'd like to thank you all for joining once again. Again, hopefully you found something good out of this. Next week, going to be looking at alliance selection. Uh, going to kind of dive deep into the decisions we've made in the past, how we end up there, what our process looks like. So hopefully you find that to be pretty interesting. I think it should be another good one. But yeah, I hope you all have a good week.